Code it now. Part A. Write a program to fill an array with the numbers from 1 to 100, then output the sum of the array. Okay, so let's go to our JGrass window, start a new file with Control-N, enter to select Java as the language. Let's go back to an old file for a second and copy the contents. So there we go, Control-C, and then go back to the untitled window, Control-V to paste. Okay. So now let's change the name of the file on this top level comment. And let's see, we can call this one maybe sum to 100. Sum to 100. And we'll change the name in the class declaration as well. Sum to 100. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is get rid of this old code in the main method because we're not going to need it anymore. Okay. And now we can start writing the code we need. So the first thing we're going to want to do is fill an array with the numbers from 1 to 100. So first we need to declare an array of the appropriate size. So int array, and we'll just call this nums, seems like a reasonable name, equals new int. Now, I didn't put in a number yet for the brackets, and there's a reason for that. So there are two ways that you could go about this. You can create an array of size 100 exactly. And if you do this, remember, arrays are indexed from 0. So this would mean that when you create the for loop to fill in the values, right, the index would go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, all the way up to, 99, because we're going to go from less than, right, less than nums.length. And then when you actually fill in the values for the array, instead of saying, nums bracket, instead of doing something like the following where we would say nums I equals I, we would have to do nums I equals I plus 1 because we want the values from 1 to 100, not from 0 to 99. So you could do that, and you could also choose to instead declare the size as 101, and you can start indexing the array from 1 less than or equal to 100, and this way you could just say num I equals I. So in my case, I'm actually going to go ahead and stick to the 100 size because this way I avoid wasting unnecessary space with that first index that we would not use if we did 101. But you could do it any way that you like, of course, whatever makes the most sense to you. And then after this, we can go ahead and start filling in our array. So for this, we're going to say for ints I equals 0, as long as I is less than nums.length. We do I++. Then we get our curly braces. All right, so now, like I said earlier, we would say nums I equals I plus 1. And this is simply because the index I is iterating from 0 to 99, but we need to store the values from 1 to 100, so we just add 1. And this will do the job for us. So just to make that extra clear, I can even add a comment. So iterates from 0 to 99 and store values from 1 to 100. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to output the sum of the array. So we're going to need another for loop. So for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than nums.length. I plus plus. So now the interesting thing about this problem is that actually, the more I think about it, we don't necessarily need this other for loop. We can use this other for loop, right? And then we could have a separate variable that we declare outside. So let's call this separate variable maybe int sum, right, equals 0. And then within this other for loop, we could just access the array over all the indices of I. So we could do nums, or sorry, my mistake, rather sum plus equals nums I. That's one way of doing it. But another thing that we can actually also do is we could even go ahead and compute the sum of all the array items while we're filling in the array. It's a very much, legal thing to do. It's not illegal to do something like that. So let's see what that would look like, because it would actually save us a little bit of space. It would result in less code, rather. So if we did that, what would it look like? So obviously we would need to declare some variable a little earlier, so we would need to put it up here. So int sum equals 0. And so as we're filling in the array, so we filled in the value right in the for loop, and then as we fill in the value, we can just say sum plus equals nums I. And this way, each time we fill in a value for the array nums, we also add that value to the sum. So instead of, going through the loop 2 times, we just go through once. And the last thing we can do is print out the sum. So system.out.println, the sum of the numbers from 1 to 100 is, then we do plus sum, close the parentheses, and semicolon. Okay, so now we can save our file with Control S, enter to accept the defaults, then Control B to compile. Oh, whoops, we made a silly mistake here, but thankfully the compiler told us exactly what the issue was. So as you can see here, it says that on line 11, so it actually points us straight to it with this gray line here. It says that sums plus equals nums bracket I close bracket is missing a semicolon. So we can just quickly add that in, no worries. So now let's save the file again with Control S. Then let's compile it with Control B. And there we go. So we compiled successfully. Now we can run it with Control R. So it says here that the sum of the numbers from 1 to 100 is 5,050. So that seems pretty reasonable. Yeah, seems reasonable to me. 5,050 sounds about right. Code it now. Part B. Write an accompanying code segment that will output the array in reverse. So with respect to the array, this is referencing the array that we created in part A, where we had to fill an array with the numbers from 1 to 100. So let's go over to our JGrass window. And for this part B, let's just create a separate file, because it's nice to, have separate files for separate tasks. So Control N for new file, Enter for Java as the language. And then we definitely want to copy the code from part A in this case, because it's going to be very, very similar. The only thing we're going to change is what we print out at the very end. So Control C to copy, go back to the entitled window, Control V to paste. So instead of sum to 100 for the name, let's change the name of this top level comment to reverse 100. And let's do the same for the class declaration. So reverse 100. All right. So now for the actual contents of the main method, what we're going to want to remove is this last print statement. So instead of printing out the sum, we want to do something a little different. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to iterate through the array backwards. So let's write a comment saying that that's what we're going to do. So iterate backwards. Oh, spelled through wrong. Through the array and print out each value. All right. So let's create our for loops. So for int I. Now, since we want to go backwards, the best way to do this is to start from the end of the array. And the end of the array, remember, we want the index. So the index is going to be the length of the last index of the array is going to be the length of the array minus 1. So we want nums.length minus 1, and this is because, remember, arrays are indexed starting from 0 to the length of the array minus 1. And then as long as I is, and in this case we want greater than or equal to 0, because we go from 0 all the way to nums length minus 1. And then instead of I++, we want I minus minus, because we want to go down. So we want to start from the very end of the array and then go down to the lowest index of 0. Then we need our curly braces. And now we can actually go ahead and put in our print statement. So we want system.out. And in this case, we'll just print it out all on one line rather than on separate lines for each value. So to do that, we'll just do print instead of println. And we will do, let's see, what's the best way? I see, okay, so let's do nums I, so we want to access the value, so we'll print the value, and then we'll print a space, so then that way it's value, space, value, space, value, space. So plus, oh, whoops, made a mistake there, plus space. And then we close the parentheses, and then semicolon. So in this way we have a value with space, next value with space, and it's all on one nice line. And so that should be everything. So Control S to save, Enter to accept the defaults, Control B to compile, so compiled successfully, and then Control R to run. And there we go, perfect. So we have it all on one nice, neat line, and we have the values from 1 all the way to, or rather from 100 all the way to